Michael, there we go.
Morning, Michael.
Morning.
So is that everybody for now?
I think so.
All right. All right, we'll call this meeting to order. The May 5th meeting of the Healthy Growth Advisory Committee. To start with, do we have any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? I can't see everybody's square, so if you want to be recognized, you got to say something. Okay, I don't hear or see any, so we'll assume no. The next step is the approval of this agenda. Anybody have any concerns with it? Seeing and hearing none, we'll assume it's approved. Approval of the minutes. I think they were distributed with the agenda, the minutes of April the 7th. Any concerns, modifications, changes, deletions, etc.? No? All right. Seeing or hearing none, we'll take them as approved as well. Takes us to our action item today. We're going to discuss, have a delegation on our Attainable Housing Background Report. Before we get started with Victoria, I wonder, Mariana, did you want to, or Brett, did you want to set this up for the benefit of anybody watching?
Sure, I can do that, or unless you wanted to, Brett?
No, Mariana, I was going to say Mariana can do it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Mariana.
Thank you. So I just wanted to welcome Victoria Agyepong from the University of Guelph, from the graduate program in rural planning and development. Victoria and two of her colleagues, Rachel Suffern and Dawson McKenzie, have been working over the last few months through this course that they're doing to assist the township with attainable housing with the strategy, and they've been tasked with trying to come up with a definition to assist us and some targets, so that basically they did a background research paper to assist us in this topic, and did a very good job, a very thorough report, providing a lot of background information for this committee to use in moving forward with the township's attainable housing strategy. So I just wanted to send a big thank you to all three of them for working very well with us and trying to provide that information. And their professor of the course is Paul Kraling as well, so he has worked with them. So I wanted to thank all of them and welcome Victoria, and she'll be providing a presentation today on a summary of the report, and we'll be available to answer any questions. So welcome, Victoria, and thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mariana. And yes, welcome, Victoria.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Mariana, for the introduction. So on behalf of my team, we want to thank you for the opportunity to develop a background research paper to support the township's efforts towards attainable housing. It has been a privilege to work on such an important project for the township under the guidance of Mariana and Paul over the past 4 months. I would like Devlin to present for me the presentation as we move along. So on the next slide, on behalf of my, the presentation will follow this agenda to the latter to enable the Healthy Growth Committee not only, give me a sec. Not only, this presentation will follow this agenda to the latter to enable this committee not only get a snapshot of our findings, but also how the recommendations that were made were reached. And then a short Q&A section will follow after the presentation if there are any questions. On the next slide, to conduct the project, we drew from policies in the growth plan, the provincial policy statement, and the township's official plan, and its other policies and bylaws, and then lessons and best practices of other municipalities and academic literature on attainable housing. Daniel Paralek popularized middle housing, which is otherwise known as attainable housing in some places, or workforce housing, to serve the demand of the missing middle. Now, the missing middle is a portion of the employment market not having sufficient income or choice to buy or rent homes in their local area. So to understand the setting of our research, we first looked at the top employment industries in the township, which revealed that the top 4 industries are sales and service, trades, transport and equipment, operators, and then business, finance and administrative occupations, and then tourism. On the next slide, next, we looked at the center's demographic trends compared to the provincial average to determine whether housing in Central Wellington is attainable for residents in employment and as their needs evolve. On our next slide, in terms of population projections, the township's households is anticipated to increase from 12,780 in 2021 to 18,690 in 2041. Also, the proportion of total population in employment is projected to get to almost half of the total population in 2041. So for current trends, compared to the provincial average, Central Wellington has just 1% more of its population percentage in under 15 years old and 4.5% less in the 15 to 64 years range, which is the core age for workforce. And then additionally, its population range of 65 years and older is 3.6% greater than the provincial average. These results can have significant effects on housing attainability as the population needs evolve through aging and retirement. On our slide 6, the Central Wellington's ownership rate, home ownership rate, is much higher than that of the 70% provincial average. As you can see, it sits at 82%. Also, only 18% of housing in the township are renter-occupied units compared to the province's average of 30%. However, when we looked at these comparisons with the provincial average, we wondered if the housing stock offered more choice to fit renters and owners' needs, and whether the recent listings for home ownership was affordable given the local median income for renters and owners. So on our next slide, we look at the income trends. And a look at the income trends in the city revealed that although lone parent households have risen in Central Wellington from 2,050 households to 2,320 households in the last 4 years, lone parent households make less income than dual parent households, which indicates that although the median household income in the township has been increasing since 2001, it is doing so at a slower rate. So the next question was how this rate of income increase compared to housing prices trends. On our next slide, we reviewed the housing trends, and these are the main points that we came across. A review of the recent housing listings in the township and the community's profile from Stats Canada revealed that although the median household income for renters is about half of the town's median household income of 94K, renters spend only about 23% of their income on rent and utilities at $1,052, which is 2% lower than the Ontario average. Hence, affordability may not necessarily be the issue for renters in the township, as provision of a diverse housing stock is. Although home ownership rate is higher than the provincial average, the recent listings revealed that the housing median price in the township has increased from $360K in 2016 to $850K in 2021, which is over 300% in just 5 years. So in conclusion, there is a missing middle housing crisis in Central Wellington, which requires consideration for not only affordability, but also housing stock and evolving household needs. In our next slide, We then realized now that we had the background information to really understand the middle housing situation in St. Wellington, we proceeded to try to define an attempt to define the attainable housing in St. Wellington's context. So in 2017, taking us back to the federal government level, the federal government came out with a national housing strategy, which was a $70 billion plan to help improve the affordability and availability and quality of housing in Canada. And so for affordable housing, to receive funding through the programs provided by the strategy, at least 30% of units must rent at 80% or less of the median market rental rates. The province of Ontario defines affordable housing as the least expensive of a unit for which the rent does not exceed 30% of gross annual household income for low and moderate income households, or a unit for which the rent is at or below the average market rate of a unit in the regional market area. A review of many municipalities who have affordable housing or attainable housing strategies, they were all using the definition, most were using the definition as 30% of individuals' annual household income. However, in order to address this missing middle housing issue, we needed to define attainable housing in a manner that is workable, as well as understand the potential barriers to attainable housing in St. Wellington. So on review of the federal, provincial, and academic and municipal literature, we observed that although attainable housing is sometimes used interchangeably with affordable housing, as we have seen at the federal and provincial level, per local context, affordability may constitute only a sub-component to what is attainable. So an all-encompassing definition would need to seek to serve the proportion of workers who are unable to find housing that meets their needs and or income levels. It should also ensure that the housing density targets balance the scale of single-family housing and multi-unit or cluster housing. So multi-unit or cluster housing could be anything between anything between a duplex to multiplex, to secondary units, courtyard apartments, bungalow courts, townhouse, or live-work housing options, and depending on the local needs. It should also promote workable urban living for the development to promote healthy living, and must also maintain a local character and a fit for locality's resource capacity. So attainable housing then it's not just about affordability. Aside affordability, should consider housing types, the build form, the community design, and associated development cost, and the socioeconomic household needs in a locality. Some key potential barriers that we found for localities who have tried to embark on this program, and also looking at how that is relevant to St. Wellington, included the following. So the first one had to do with market demand from affluent retirees, increased popularity of short-term accommodations, and seasonal or secondary home owners pushing housing prices upwards, even for a resale market. Most workers too, especially in rural municipalities, and in the case of St. Wellington, have seasonal jobs, especially in the tourism sector, making it difficult for them to find suitable rental terms. Usually rental terms that are on offer are usually 8 months or 12 months, which may be too long for seasonal workers. Increasing costs such as development charges for new housing development increases the development risks for developers to provide attainable housing. And then there's increased equity requirements, extended payback period, and rent control legislation that caps annual rent increases, which limits the developers' demand for rental housing development. Also, lack of regional transit mapping, which extends the public transit hours and non-existence of employer co-funded private shuttles in localities inhibits workers to attain affordable homes which are far from their employers. And this is in reference to workers who are commuters. Entry-level employees may not earn enough income to afford a home at the prevailing market price or be able to meet the down payment required. The last barrier that we also identified, but I would explain why that doesn't apply since our LinkedIn, is that the intersectionality between foreign ownership and attainable housing can lead to the crowding out of local buyers. But in Central Wellington's case, we found that the dominant type of developers are local. So this barrier may not apply in the near term, but it's good to bear in mind in the longer term. The possibility is as foreign developers come into the game. On our next slide, which is slide 10, we find that after understanding the barriers and understanding the things we should be considering for Central Wellington, we then approached defining attainable housing in Central Wellington as housing that costs up to 30% of a household's gross income, with a household's income ranging from 80 to 120% of local median income. We also included in the definition that beyond the financial considerations or affordability, the housing should accommodate all people through all stages of life as needs and means change, while being both available and sustainable. Attainable housing targets, they usually target the underserved populace needs, whose income levels and employment demography exclude them from owning and renting housing at the market rate. Based on the assumption that 30% of gross household income directed towards housing costs is attainable, housing attainability levels by household income levels for full-time and part-time workers can help determine the attainability benchmark for maximum ownership price and maximum monthly rental price. Determining the housing attainability levels by income, in addition to the nature of employment in a community's high employment growth sectors, allows a community to determine which demographic groups to prioritize. The high employment growth sectors allow the community to determine which demographic groups to prioritize for the attainable housing program. Subsequently, with the priority demographic groups in mind, priority residential types for the housing mix in the local area will be determined using the information on the vacancy rates of housing stock. Average and middle incomes typically account for those between 80 and 120%, which is why that was included in the definition of the areas of the locality's median income. As such, the definition employed within this strategy for attainable housing combines both the definition for what is deemed affordable for any income and what the average and middle household incomes are locally in Central Wellington. So what does that really look like when since we said the definition is workable? On our next slide, we find that we went towards what is attainable in concrete terms so that we can have numbers that we can work with. So the median income of a household in Central Wellington is $92,275 annually as of 2018. 80% of this median income is $73,820 annually. And 30% of that income will be $22,146. 120% of the median income is also shown, and that would be on the top part of attainability. And this translates to $1,899.50 to $2,849.50 per month, for a monthly range for what should be attainable in Central Wellington. So for a 30-year mortgage, what this monthly figures translate to, if we are assuming that the mortgage rate is 4% for housing prices, then the housing prices in Central Wellington would need to be between 430,383K to 653,591K for homeownership to be attainable for the middle income earners, while the current median renting cost, as you can see, is much lower, even when utilities are included in Central Wellington. So the $1,899.50 to $2,849.50 are actually affordable, attainable for residents there. However, the available stock is not meeting the current demand, as we already have alluded to, since only 18% of housing in the township is actually rent owned compared to the provincial average. In our next slide, using the definition and the associated cost as already presented, we then progress towards 4 increments of housing targets to over the next 20 years for 6,000 attainable housing units, of which 30% will be for rental housing. The time increments are based on the growth targets determined by the Growth Act and is set out in detail within the Wellington County Official Plan number 99. Expected housing unit growth for each time increment is based on growth targets determined by the Growth Act and set out in detail within the Wellington County Official Plan. The number of rental units proposed in each target is based on achieving a goal of 30% of housing units being rental-based. This rental unit proportion is aligned with the provincial average of rental-based units. How these calculations in the fourth column were arrived at is provided in detail in Appendix B of the report, which under the topic Attainable Housing Definition and Targets. In alignment with the projection of each time increment, local median gross household income is calculated with an annual increase of 2.18%, as determined by the average change in income between 2016 and 2021. Why we've also outlined a rationale for each timeline so that the committee can have a clear understanding why using these timelines can help in what can be done within each time frame. Now, for next steps on what can be done, we'll move on to slide 13. And we proposed, based on, as we looked at these, the targets and the findings, and how relevant they are for each term, we recommended 6 objectives in alignment with the Planning Act, the Provincial Policy Statement, or MAFRA guidelines, and also draw from the relevant findings from Wellington, Dufferin, Guelph Public Health Unit and the Township Centre Wellington's recent Healthy Community Design Baseline Project final report. So we also drew in terms of for the build form, Daniel Parlek's missing middle site planning recommendations for 2 to 5 acre lots. We also looked at the Golden Girls Act and the Leamington Boarding House Study and the South Georgian Bay Attainable Housing Background Report for their tourism sector. To achieve each objective within each time increment, we have proposed what should be done in the short term, medium term, and long term. So the first objective was that the township should consider increasing land use efficiency to protect prime agricultural lands as it embarks on the attainable housing project, and to do that while ensuring efficient land use and maintain attainability target sets. We recommended that the township consider incentives to ease development cost and risk in the short term through density incentives and market-based solutions, and that the township work towards inclusionary zoning policies within the development permit system in the long term. And our next objective, which was objective 2, we also recommend evidence-based target promotions in the short term, such as the Make It 2 campaign, as well as strategic use of community benefit charges and zoning bylaw amendments in the long term to increase development applications for secondary units in Central Wellington. In objective 3, we made various recommendations that but most of them had to be long-term because there were land use policies that require time to implement. The official plan, we recommended that it should allow for land use designations for mixed-use development and specifically include grocery stores in the permitted uses. Grocery stores, we found out from the Healthy Growth report was something that was not workable within a workable distance in the county. So allowing for permitted uses in these mixed-use developments can also address that issue as we work towards attainable housing. Council directive or corporate policy should allow a municipality to direct surplus municipal land to attainable housing initiatives as a priority. Zoning bylaw amendments should encourage the development of more flexible live-work arrangements in residential land use designations. And in the medium term, attainable housing build forms should consider smaller corner sites using some of the build form recommendations that Paralec made. In the township's urban design manual, these choices could be inserted. The subdivision plan can create attainable housing needs that are ideal for remote workers or entrepreneurs. An or work units option consisting of 8 two-story buildings to hold 31 live-work units, and each unit can be 720 square feet with a flex space of 720 square feet on the ground floor. These build forms, as Paralec had found, allows for 11.5 units per acre, 4,380 square feet green open space, and 62 of street parking, which fits the requirements for the township. In objective 4, in the short term, the township should consider better understanding the needs and priority groups within the municipality's current and expected missing middle, and develop policies to encourage communal and shared ownership through a workforce housing needs assessment study. Details on some of the priority variables to look at for the needs assessment study are outlined in page 24 of the report. Furthermore, in the medium to long term, we recommend municipalities as landowners initiatives to actively intervene in the market with the goal of providing housing that is attainable for the local median income earners. However, this requires a municipality to have both land and equity funding. Another option within this term is the community land trust actions that a municipality can make to protect local land base, and that they hold these lands in trust for future generations. Again, attainable housing build forms to consider for these, the municipalities as landowners and community land trust have to be clearly outlined in the municipality's urban design manual to allow for the diverse housing stock that is required for attainable housing. In Objective 5, we do understand that such new concepts of development will definitely face NIMBYism. So then we also looked at ways that we can look at yes in my backyard movements. And what we found out from the report that the Healthy Growth Baseline report had revealed was that health, as we may think, is not necessarily the reason, or the triggers may not necessarily be the trigger for NIMBYism in Central Wellington against attainable housing objectives. So rather, we should do data collection on residents' reasons or triggers for NIMBYism against attainable housing objectives so that we can better understand that. And then based on that, create mythbuster promotions to justify why these triggers make no health, safety, or public welfare sense. We should also promote this information on why NIMBYism would lead to better personal and communal benefits, and why the municipal-wide approaches are most likely to reduce the incidence of gentrification. So more like a movement that looks beyond just the health benefits for attainable housing. In Objective 6, we recommend that the township consider using this 6-point criteria that is outlined on the far right of the presentation to settle on a mix of strategies that will fit the township's needs, strategic priorities, and capacity. The details of each criteria are outlined on page 28 of the report. Thank you for your time. And as we're on the last slide, I would like to know if there are any questions for the report that has been presented.
Thank you so much, Victoria. That is an incredible report, I think, and I hope we can do it justice. To start off with, are there any questions for Victoria? There's an awful lot there. Anybody? Brian?
Yes, Victoria, there was a term used, I think it was one of the barriers, unsuitable rental terms. Could you explain what that means? Is that simply cost, or are there other barriers within that?
I'm muted. Thanks, Brian, for your question. So the unsuitable rental terms is what I explained as the term of contract for leases for renters. So in Central Wellington, where we do have seasonal workers, some of them may be coming in and out for shorter terms, but at the moment, the rental options that they have requires them to have a rental term of 8 months or 12 months, which is a mismatch of their needs.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Don, Kelly here.
Kelly?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Victoria. If you could pass on your thanks to Dawson and Rachel too. This is really good work. It gave us exactly what we needed and more to kind of take it from here. This provides real good context, and it really is helping us out. So hopefully you guys get a good mark on it. And if there's anything we can do to help out on that side, let us know. So no, I just wanted to let you know that the writing is great, really well written. I love the way it's organized. You came to a really good definition, some real practical recommendations that give us a lot of material to talk through. And so I just wanted to pass on my thanks to you and your classmates for doing some great work.
Thanks, Kelly. Any Any other questions before we let Victoria go? All right, seeing none. Well, again, sorry, did I miss somebody?
yeah.
Brian,
No, it was Ian.
Ian, I've only got a few pictures here, so I can't.
Don was before me.
Yeah.
Don Valerie.
Juan Valerie, I thought I heard
Yes.
him. Okay.
Yeah. Victoria, I would like to echo what Kelly said. I thought the report was excellent. And it's so targeted for us. It gives us a roadmap. Really gives us a great roadmap to get this done. Thank you.
Anybody else? Ian?
Thank you, Chairman Don. Victoria, excellent report. Thank you. One question I have is related to the forecasted number of units we should be focusing on. So looking at page 18 of the report, for the first 5 years, you mentioned 940 units, of which 282 are rentals. So the 658 units that are home ownership, are those to be within the attainable housing category, or are those just total number of housing units?
So that's within the attainable housing category. And that is why the workforce needs assessment survey becomes very useful, because then it helps us, the township, to be able to target these 640 units and the 282 units specifically for different types of workforce housing that is relevant for Central Wellington.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, seeing or hearing none. Again, Victoria, echoing what everybody else has said, thank you so much. Please pass on our appreciation to your group and your prof. And like Kelly said, I hope you all do get A's, because you should. As I said, I just hope we can do justice to it. My recollection of being a student is very, very rarely do you get a chance to actually influence events in the real world with your classwork. And I think this will be the exception, and you all should be very, very proud of it. And as I said before, I just hope we can do it justice. So thank you again. And I guess we'll move on with the rest of the meeting. You're welcome to stay, but you certainly don't have to. So it was a pleasure to see you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you all for this opportunity.
Thank you. I see Kelly's hand up. Is that your hand, Kelly, there?
No, that's my clapping. I'm
That's your clapping. Okay.
Come on, Don, get with the emoticons here.
I'm not Zoom literate to that extent just yet. All right. We've had the questions of the delegation. Is there discussion of the report? And I guess in terms of what we do with it and where we go with it, or do we just want to reflect on it for a while and maybe come back to it in the subcommittees? So any thoughts on that? There's an extraordinary amount of information there, obviously. Brett.
I think in terms of the report, it's great, and we have some targets. Councillor McCrae mentioned the short-term sort of target, and I think one of the things that Mariana and I talked about that we could bring through one of the subcommittees is actually, now digging into the detail of our supply in terms of the mix of units that's in the different developments that are coming on stream, what our sort of intensification history or trends are, because, for example, if someone adds a second unit to a house, then there's a pretty good assurance that that's a rental unit, because you can't really divide it up and sell it. So we could get a little bit of information from our housing data on, what types of units, how close we are to being able to meet those targets. One of the downfalls, of course, in our process is if you've got a short-term target like that, the housing that's going to get built, in 2022 was probably sold in a plan of subdivision in 2020. So there's always a lag between the market and, the actual construction that we need to look at and figure out. And we have several small apartment buildings, pending projects that we can look at and try to come up with some measure of how close we are to moving towards those goals. In particular, that gap between that we're at only 18% of our housing stock being rental, and we maybe should move towards 30. That's something we can look at in the mix of units that's coming forward. What is the likelihood that those units are going to be rentals? So I think that's something, a little bit of a housing supply analysis would be the next step for staff to do.
All right, and then that would come forward to what, the financial subcommittee or the policy subcommittee?
Well, we'll have to talk about that. I was thinking the policy, but maybe it's something that has to come to the whole group.
Okay.
Whenever our next meeting is.
All right. We have our meeting scheduled in June, and then I think the plan was to sort of suspend the whole committee meetings over the course of the summer while the subcommittees press on. So maybe that's how that'll work. Any other comments?
I have a question. It's Kathy.
Oh, hi, Kathy.
I think this is a question probably for Brett or Mariana. The applications that are coming forward now to Committee of Adjustment or the building permit applications, is it possible to look at those for community, I forget the term, community benefit? So if they're asking for less parking, is it possible at this point to say, okay, that looks like a great idea. Can you think about putting an attainable apartment in that project? Is it possible to do that now, or do we have to do some kind of regulation around that?
Brett?
I think there's some financial tools that we might need to have in place before we could do that. But certainly knowing that some of these projects going forward might give us the ability to negotiate with the applicants when they do come forward to do that. And as far as securing or requiring a commitment to affordability or attainability, I think that's something where we'd need the financial incentive tools. There are a few things already built in. For example, one of the new things that came into effect with the Development Charges Act in 2020 is that if a building is a rental housing development, that's the term that the DC Act uses, which means that it has 4 or more rental units in it, then they get to pay their development charges in installments. And we're actually just about to, we've had, I think, at least 3 projects get started in 2020 that are meet that definition of rental housing. And those buildings are just about to be occupied. So their first payment of development charges is due. But so that's a bit of a benefit in that the payment of the development charges was delayed from when the building permit was issued to when the unit is occupied. And then the builder has his rental stream is about to start. And his construction costs have already happened. And then the development charge get to be paid in installments over the next 6 years instead of all at once. So that's quite a bit of a bonus or an incentive to development to provide these additional rental units. So there's at least 3 that are going to fit that category that will be occupied in the next year or so.
Okay, Kathy, again?
Just a follow-up question. So who keeps track of whether or not, like if you're doing some community benefit incentives, who keeps track of whether the apartment owner is actually offering those benefits over the long term, because I can see that that could be an issue too.
Anybody? Brett?
Well, I think that, you know, that's sort of the $64,000 question. And one of the reasons why you need an actual program then to give you the legal authority to enter into an agreement. To say that, we have been on these units that are rental housing, we're requiring the developer to provide an affidavit that they are going to be rental units. And then sometimes we get condominium buildings that are rental units. So we've working with our municipal solicitors, trying to come up with a little bit of a document for them to execute, saying that if they sell one of those condo units that got a break in paying DCs because it was purported to be a rental, then all the DCs are due if they sell a unit. So we're trying, but unfortunately the provincial government didn't include those kinds of things in the regulations. But down the road, if we have a development permit system and we get into inclusionary zoning, then you have a clear legal authority to have an agreement to require those units to be affordable over the long term. If we had a community improvement plan, then we would also have an agreement that would be binding in the future to ensure that those units remain attainable. Now, then who enforces and checks? That's another story too, right? Those are all the things we're going to have to get into.
Right. I would think those are the kind of details that you're going to get into when we discuss financial incentives and how exactly to, if we're going to give incentives, how do we get our money's worth and how to ensure that? That's basically what we're asking, what Kathy's asking. And I think there are ways to do that. And we're going to have to get to grips with that pretty quickly. And, you know, do that under the rubric of a community improvement plan is probably the way to go. But those are the kinds of things that we're going to try and get into as soon as we can. Anybody else comments again in terms of what we're doing going forward with the information that we've had today?
It's Nico. I have a question. Yeah. I have a question with regard to rent. The Victoria, in her background research paper, explained that as far as the housing trend is concerned, the rental cost in Center Wellington was quoted to be around $1,050. And then I'm looking at a presentation I think that Jana Burns had made to council. She is the director of Wellington Place Museum and Archives and Economic Development for Wellington County. Now, she notes she did note that the average rent for Center Wellington is now $2,260 with an average vacancy rate of 1%. That is a huge disparity between what has been provided in terms of the background research paper and what has been quoted by Mrs. Burns. And I'm wondering, is there some way that we can figure out just exactly what the average rental cost for Center Wellington is at this point? Because if you want to jump from 18% to 30%, and at those exorbitant rent rates, you can increase to 30%, but if nobody can afford to live there, then that creates a real problem. So I wondered if somehow or other we could get a more detailed observation as to exactly what the current rental costs in Center Wellington are.
Anybody? Brett?
Mariana had her hand up to answer that one. I can follow on if she doesn't say what I was going to say.
Well, I just wanted to say to that, I noticed the same information and out of Jana's presentation to council last week. So I think the study itself, I believe that they had used Stats Canada, so information, and that was from the town folio using census data. So we have to keep in mind that the census data was using 2015 census figures that came out in 2016. So they are quite dated now, and we are expecting to get new census data that will be more up to date. But in line with that, I think somebody, I think from our committee should be speaking to the county to see where they got their information from, their sources of information. And maybe Brett can speak to this a little bit more. But also, I just wanted to add that we would be speaking to the county as well with some of the needs assessment information on workforce costs. And at our subcommittee, we had spoken on that as well. And I know that Kelly was going to be speaking with the county about some of that information. So there is definitely an opportunity to further augment some of the information in this report and to get maybe more recent, more up-to-date data on rental housing costs. And I'm not sure if Brett then has something else to add to that.
I was going to suggest that my guess is, in knowing the motivation behind the work that the county did, I think the discrepancy would be that the stats that the students were able to find from StatsCan or CMHC or whatever source would include everybody's existing rent. So when the average rent is a little over $1,000 a month, back at that point in time is all kinds of rental units that are historic and maybe of lower rent and are protected by rent control from rent increases. And the higher number that the county quotes would be from the county looking at new market available housing. And that obviously in all of Ontario is a big discrepancy that we have, where we have existing units that are rent control protected and have lower rents, whereas brand new market rents or rental units that are in a condominium don't have that protection initially, and so they rent for a much higher rate. That's certainly what we know from new buildings that are constructed with rental units, that the rents are much higher, obviously, than $1,000 a month.
Okay, thanks. I think that's helpful. Anybody else?
Ian's got his hand up, Don.
Okay. Ian, glad someone can see these things.
Thank you, Don. I guess one of the questions I had is related to the average rental rates that are being discussed. Are we referring to bachelor, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, or 3-bedroom apartments? Because there is a variance in range. I think maybe that's one of the things that the committee has to look at is, going forward, what is our housing supply in terms of different sizes of rental units? How many bachelors should we be considering versus how many 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom or 1-bedroom?
Okay. Any response to that? All right. Good point.
Don's got his hand up, Don.
Thank you. How can you? Okay, Don. Thank you.
It's really difficult seeing everybody on these Zoom meetings.
Yeah, I don't see anybody. So it's either one or the other, I guess. Okay.
I just have a question. So we're looking to increase our rental stock, and which is obviously a goal. That's why we're doing this, and affordability for buying as well. But is it possible that new houses put in within, say, the town of Fergus and Elora, could they be required to do a rough in for a unit in the basement? I guess Brett or Mariana, maybe. Just to try to, what it does is, what that would do is it would lay tracks for future growth in the rental business, rental accommodations. So it's a real long-term thing, but to rough in a washroom and a kitchen in a basement before it's poured it's some cost, but it's not huge. It's when you put all the kitchens and bathrooms in, it's where all the cost comes in. But at least somebody could do it in the future if they wanted.
I might take a run at that just to say, I'm not sure there's anything that would allow us to require that. That might be something that you could incentivize, though.
Yeah. Whatever way we do it, but
and see about that. I don't, Brett, do you have anything else on that? That's just what struck me off the top.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer. I don't think there's anything legally that we could do it now, but through an incentive and that you come to an agreement, you might be able to do it that way.
anyhow, just a thought that it would put in place a lot of rental units that could come online in the future.
Yeah.
And incentivize whatever, but just sort of attack it that way.
And one of the changes in the DC Act also is that a second unit in a brand new house, the second unit is exempted from paying development charges. So if zoning wise, a second unit can meet our zoning rules, then there's no longer, I guess, a disincentive for someone to have that unit installed at the time that the home is being built instead of coming along later and adding it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, Brian, I do see you.
Great. At the financial committee meeting the other day, Steve Wright was talking about a project of his in which they were exactly doing that in a townhouse development, rather a clever way of doing it. So I think it's a great idea. And anyway, I just wanted to say that within our group, we have someone who's actually involved in such a thing. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Anybody else?
John?
Tony, I think that's you.
It is me.
Hi.
Hi. I'm just thinking about a topic that we had going way back in some very early meetings at this group, where we were talking about the issue around Airbnbs. And we were feeling at that time, I think there was some research that suggested there were maybe 100 Airbnbs, even just in Elora, that were clearly taking some of those for sure, potentially could have been an apartment unit. And I wonder, given where we are right now in the pandemic, if in fact there's anybody coming in and staying in these Airbnbs, and if some of those people who own those Airbnbs might be amenable to a conversation that says, maybe there's another thing you could do here that might help us meet our rental targets. And if there would be a way to have a conversation or maybe incentivize that, or at least explore that a little bit. And just seems like potentially an opportunity if it's already built and it's sitting there and probably vacant.
I'm sure they hope they won't be going forward, but yeah, I think the topic of short-term vacation rentals was hopefully on the agenda at some point for the policy subcommittee. And then, you know, how do you deal with new ones coming on? And then I guess your point is how you deal with the existing ones that may be underutilized or we would like utilized in a different way. One of the things that struck me from Victoria's presentation was she was talking about the uncertain or unsatisfactory rental terms, which she was saying are basically long-term leases. So with seasonal workers, and I had never thought of this, I have to say, seasonal workers aren't looking for a full year lease or looking even for they may be looking for a short-term lease. So if you just sort of do blanket prohibitions or regulation of short-term rentals to capture Airbnbs, you're probably also then not helping the group that was identified in the study as wanting short-term rentals. So the short-term rental issue is a little bit more generic maybe than just tourism and vacation rentals. And that's what kind of struck me. So I think that's certainly worthy of some thought and some consideration. You do want ideally to encourage people to rather than building Airbnbs, to build rental units for local working people. But at the same time, the issue is a little bit more complex than just saying we don't want short-term rentals, because what she said is that's one of the things we do need. So we do have to think about that. And that's certainly a good, I think, item for the policy committee sooner rather than later. And then to follow up, once you have some idea of that, to take that conversation to existing owners and see whether you can persuade or incentivize them to change their arrangements or market to a different market. I don't know, but that's all grist for the mill, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's an opportunity here, and I'm thinking about the fantastic job that those U of G students did, unbelievable. If there's an opportunity for another study around short-term rentals, because my sense, Don, without knowing anything, is that a lot of these rentals are for weekends or 3 or 4 days. And there might be an opportunity here to suggest, oh, maybe you want to look at a summertime rental or something like that. I think there's lots we don't know about this. And I wonder if there might be an opportunity here for some kind of a research piece so we know more. But the time seems to be pretty good right now, just given the amount of tourism we've got now compared to a year from now, we hope, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's, again, if that's the sort of the will of the committee coming up. I know it may just be a matter of a lot of other places have gotten into studies and regulation of tourism rentals, vacation rentals. That material probably is pretty accessible to us. What you're talking about is converting people who might have originally put those in and changing them to normal rentals, if I may say that, but still basically for a shorter term. So how we handle that is I think worthy of consideration, because, as I say, I had never considered the part that Victoria raised today, but I know the Airbnb issue all by itself is significant, especially when you're giving incentives for people to build extra units in their houses and extra units in their buildings. You don't want all of those buildings or that extra units turned over to vacation rentals. You want them to be rentals for the people who need them. And there's a whole range of incentives and agreements and so on that probably go with that. So it's a big issue. Anybody else? Kelly.
Don, it probably makes sense for me to just give the group a little bit of an update on how we want to make sure that we're working with the county. So the county starts working group meeting tomorrow on affordable housing across the county. And and something exciting has happened. They've recognized what we've done here with our project plan and identifying the actions that we're going to look at and splitting it into policy related things and financial incentive related things. And they're going to adopt the work plan that we've established for their committee, which is really, really good, because we'll be driving in the same direction, and we'll be able to they'll be able to identify at county level what they want to do using the same kind of plan that we're using here. And the good thing is that I'll be involved on both committees. So I'll try to play a role of making sure that there's no gaps and we're not duplicating each other's effort. Because there's some of the things that came out of the students' paper, some of the things that we've been talking about that might be something that the county should be taking the lead on. And we have a really good group set up for that, for the county's working team as well. So the timing of that is really, really good for us to work together to drive towards action. So that's good, first of all, because if you remember back, the actions that we pulled out were based on the recommendations that came out of the county's attainable housing strategy. And just to point on that, that was a pretty substantial piece of work with a consultant. So if Yana comes up with a certain a figure as far as average rentals and things like that, it's pretty vetted and it's pretty substantial. So and it was just done last year. So that's a good thing, because a lot of that body of work that has already been done. So it makes sense for the county's working group to also take off from that foundation as well. So that's starting tomorrow. we'll make sure that we're working really strongly together. There might be a need, in addition to me being on both groups, for somebody else from this committee to be also sit in on their groups as well, and then vice versa, just to make sure we're working together. It's really important to me that we drive towards action as fast as possible and recommendations as fast as possible. But there's also an opportunity for the county and the township to kind of combine. If we need another resource to help us do some of the legwork that's required to drive towards recommendations, maybe we can share that resource. And we can also tap into the county's planning staff as well as our own planning staff. So if we do this right, this should be a very timely way to work together. So that's our challenge, and I'll take on the liaison role myself to make sure that we're kind of working well together. There are certain things that we know are going to come out of the policy side related to the community improvement plans that the county's doing and the town's doing. We want to make sure we're working in coordination there, as well as we do know that there are some disincentives right now that we want to get rid of. So that we can help our developers so it's worth their while to create rental units. So we've identified those, and maybe we can bring a resource on to help us to identify those big barriers and move on them as quickly as possible from both a county policy standpoint and a township policy standpoint. So I just wanted to bring the committee up to speed that is going on right now. It starts tomorrow. And really looking forward to some real good synergies between the two groups. The county is also looking to this group. So the county is very concerned with making sure that they're equitable and consistent across the board when it comes to all the lower tier municipalities. What I'll be positioning this group about is let Centerwine to be the pilot project then. So if you want to do something consistent across the board, let us go first, because we're ready to go. We're ready to roll up our sleeves. We got a really good group here who is really looking forward to making some a substantial improvement in this area. So let's use Centerwine as a pilot. So that's what I'll be pushing for at the county meeting starting tomorrow. So good news, we're all on the same page. I thought Iana's presentation was really good, and I thought everybody's presentation. Don, you did a great job as well at that meeting. Like we really presented a really solid case, and we got unanimous support from council, which doesn't just between us friends, that doesn't happen that often. So it was really good to see, and it's a great reflection of people's value in what we're doing here. So based on that foundation, we have what we need, and basically what came out of council is move as fast as you can. So I'm taking that, and we're going to take that, and we're going to run with it. So I think we've kind of turned the corner, and I think we're off to the races now.
That's good. That's great. Thank you, Kelly. That's good to hear. And if you do need anybody from this committee to represent in addition to yourself or anything, let me know. I'd be happy to do it. I'm sure there's others who'd be happy to do it as well. And maybe we rotate it around or we just put somebody there. But yeah, if you need another body, by all means. That almost would be an evergreen agenda item, would be like an update kind of thing on those meetings as we go forward.
Yeah, for sure. I'll make sure I bring that on.
Yeah. Any other comments on the study before we move on to the agenda? The rest of the agenda, I should say. Because I think, okay, the next thing up is reports from the subcommittee. So we have the finance subcommittee up first. Who wants to do that? Brett, maybe since you were the quarterback of that group, do you want to give a quick update as to what it talked about?
Yeah, sure. We had a very excellent discussion, and we decided that we would focus our efforts, I think, on two things: our financial barriers to housing, and then incentivizing housing. So as a financial barrier, we would look at all the cost sort of inputs that go into barriers to housing, like development charges obviously being the one big thing that the township's in control of, but also some of the other sort of associated municipal fees and charges like building permit fees or cash in lieu or parkland dedication payments could all be thought of as barriers to housing being built. And then the second stream was incentivizing. And to that end, we talked about the city of Belleville having done a CIP. So our consensus amongst our group was that we would move forward, and in our future meetings we'll talk about CIP policies and programs that could be developed. And that also aligns, as Mayor Linton just said, that the county working group will be talking about CIP programs too. So there's a synergy there for the county and the township to work together on CIP programs that can contribute to housing affordability. We did talk about our next meeting date because so far we've only got one in the calendar, and the meeting date that we've chosen going forward had been the fourth Thursday of the month, which is going to conflict with the Mayor's County Council schedule. So we don't have a date yet for our second meeting.
But it
The
won't
other
be that.
alternative I think that was discussed early was whether Tuesdays were a day that was generally available. So maybe the fourth Tuesday of the month going forward could work.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
that covers it. Don, you did
Yeah.
a pretty good job of summarizing the two streams at our meeting. So you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's the gist of it. We don't want to get too complex, and it's two basic streams. It's removing barriers is one, and incentivizing is two, and incentivizing takes you to the community improvement plan. So I think in broad strokes, it's pretty simple. It gets more complicated as you get into it, but that's where we're going. So I think that's that. What about the policy subcommittee? Any, Mariana, do you want to give us an update on that?
Sure, thanks, Don. So we met, basically the purpose of our last meeting was to, we went through the student report, we looked at the definition, provided some comments back, and so we tweaked that definition and some of the other elements of the report and to the final product that we have today. So we discussed that, we looked at the targets, and we're going to get some more information back from the county, as I just mentioned previously. We're going to be getting information more about the workforce, the costs, to get a more accurate idea of where the gaps are with attainable housing for certain groups. And we talked a little bit about sort of the gap between what's affordable and attainable, and if there is a gap there that needs to be addressed. So we're going to be honing in a little bit more just on some of the specific information that would help guide us, but we're also going to be looking at the sort of available supply. Again, we discussed previously about what's coming on board in some of the subdivisions and new developments that we're expecting, to see how close we're going to be getting to some of the targets. So we're collecting more information in that regard, and then working on, I think at our next meeting, we're going to be probably going to look at one or two of the key elements that we'd want to bring forward to council soon. So we're going to be doing that at the next meeting. I don't know if there's anything else that anybody else wants to add from that meeting.
Did we have a date for the next meeting?
It would be the third Wednesday, so I can look at that quickly.
Okay, well, so that's
The 19th.
sounds right. Okay. And I should have mentioned this while we were still on the topic of the study. Maybe it's useful for the committee to just confirm its consensus that the definition, or the definition of attainable housing that was set out in there and the elements of it, is that the one we agree to and the one we agree to be working with and for, as an internal matter to us, that is what we're going for, and that's the one we accept, just as a matter of consensus to the agreement or to the committee. We all good with that? Okay, I don't see any no's and I see a few yeses. So that is our working definition of attainable housing, and the targets in there as well. They may get refined as you get a little bit more information, but in broad strokes, that's the kind of target we would be looking at as well, at least. Fair enough? All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. Anybody else have any comments, suggestions? We are going to aim for new dates for the Finance Committee. The Policy Committee is on the third Wednesdays. That's probably going to continue. And if we need help to sit on any of the county committees, Kelly will let us know. All right. Unless anybody else has any comments, I think our next meeting is scheduled for June the 2nd. That's probably going to be the last meeting of the full group for a couple, 3 months after that, while the committees, subcommittees work away. And thank you. We'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thanks, Don.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Guys.